Guten Abend, gut Nacht, mit Rosen bedacht, mit Näglein besteckt.
Welcome to the channel where I take parenting fails and turn them into educational content. Today I'm going to walk you through a step-by-step guide on how not to sleep train, because apparently I've done all the wrong things so you don't have to. You're welcome. So the first step to not sleep training your child is to put them in a bassinet. So that's not an entirely fair statement, because for the first 6 months of your child's life, you're not supposed to have them in their own room. Reasonably so. You want to keep an eye on them, and as a new mom, you're going to be very paranoid, as I was. Personally, I blame the hospital for this, because I don't want to blame myself, right? So the reason why is because our hospital, like many now, have gotten rid of that baby nursery thing, so you get the baby with you, which for the most part is a wonderful thing. As a new mom, you want your baby. They're so cute, and you love them so very much. But that automatically puts you for an attachment with your child, which is the point. So your baby knows from the beginning, I can cry and get my mommy's attention. And that's what I'm going to do. So when I was in the hospital, I had had a C-section. And so I was in the hospital for 4 straight days with my husband, thank goodness. But what that meant is that my daughter's bassinet was right next to my bed. And as a new mom who had never had a child before, I figured, oh, I have to have my baby in my arms. So literally the way I slept was I was back in the hospital bed, I had a pillow right here, and my baby was right there. She slept great for those first days. I tried to put her in the bassinet. She didn't like it. So of course I took her out, or my husband took her out, and laid her on my arm. And she stayed on my arm for the first 5 years of her life. I wish I was kidding. I'm not. My daughter slept on my arm for so long that my arm fell asleep before she did. I seriously contemplated sawing it off every night, and I didn't, not because it would hurt and I would lose my arm, but because I was worried I'd wake her up. All right, number 2, the cry it out method. So at this point, my daughter is 6 months old. She has been sleeping next to our bed in our bassinet. Really what we did is we moved her crib next to the bed. And really for the most part what happened is she would start out in the crib, end up on my arm, and sleep there. She was comfortable with the situation. I was used to the situation. My husband was ready for her to go into her own room. So he convinced me, eventually, to try the cry it out method. So the first night, it lasted a minute. Second night, maybe a couple minutes. Finally, after many nights of trying the cry it out method and numerous times of buying new audio and video monitors, because I could never trust them entirely so I could see and make sure she was breathing, one night it was magic. She slept the whole night through. My husband slept the whole night through. I didn't sleep at all, but that was par for the course. Anyways, the next morning, I go into her room. She's bright and shining and smiling like there was no problems. No tears, nothing at all. I took a picture because she was just so beautiful. And that picture mocks me on Facebook every year, because the next morning, I made a decision that would haunt me for the rest of her childhood. And that leads me to number 3. Floor mattresses are the devil's playground. So when my daughter was a baby, Montessori was all the rage. I mean, Montessori's been around for over 100 years or something, but it's on YouTube. It seemed like every video was Montessori. And that was probably them targeting me as a new mom. I understand. But as a Montessori, and there are a lot of things I absolutely approve of, but there was one thing with Montessori that I fell into. I fell prey to this idea and regret it to this day. And that is the floor mattress. They say basically, you don't need a fancy crib. All you need is a mattress on the floor. So that night that I talk about so fondly was the one and only time when she was a baby that she slept through the night on her own. We had a crib that was given to us by a friend. And it had one of those things, those latch cribs that you could just lower down. Those are not acceptable anymore. People, they can't sell them. They can't really give them away. But it was a friend of mine. She gave it to us, and it saved us some money, right? So we had this crib. Problem is, I'm 5 foot nothing. I climbing over, I had to like reach over into this crib to get my daughter, pick her up. And as she got older, she got heavier. My husband's 6'2", and she seems to be taking after him. So it was harder and harder as she got older for me to reach into that crib. Another reason why I was like not fighting too much and letting her cry it out. But so I reached into the crib and picking her up and realized, wow, she's really heavy. You know what would really work? It would be a really good idea if I could just cut the legs off of this crib. So I did. The next day, after she had that lovely night of sleep, I would cut the legs off the crib. But then I realized, you know what, this front thing doesn't really work. So I'm just going to listen to the Montessori videos and take it off, basically creating a toddler bed. She was not a year old at this point. Maybe she was. No, she had to have been a year old. So she was a year old at this point. So she was on her own. She could move around. So I take the front off. So I took the front of this crib off. It was very stable, and it was a nice little toddler bed, perfectly sized for her. She could just go in there. We could put her in the bed, and she would fall asleep and sleep through the night, right? Not so much. We're in a 2-bedroom townhouse with no stairs, so there were really no restrictions. She could get through the door, and I had both doors open. I didn't want to not be able to hear her cry as she did. So she would go and climb into our room, and that became the norm. So finally I was like, okay, I would lay down, we would try it over and over and over, right? That's fine. So really the crib was a loss. Eventually we said, okay, we'll move on to an actual toddler bed. We didn't buy a toddler bed. Instead, we got a single bed from my mom. She was older at this point. We're talking 2, 3. We've gone through this crib thing. We're fine. Whatever. It's a loss. She's not going to sleep. But now that she's in preschool, she's got to learn how to sleep on her own, right? So what we did is we have a single bed, which is great. We have this beautiful room that we've designed. We let her pick out her own colors on the wall. She has everything she could possibly want. But she is an only child, and she's used to sleeping on Mommy's arm. So when we had this single bed, Mommy had to lay down next to her. And so Mommy's not all that comfortable laying down in a single bed as my daughter gets older and older. So today, my daughter is 6 years old, or 6.5, as she says. And we have moved on to a full-size bed, which takes over about half of her room. And so that way, at least when we do fall asleep in her room, she can fall asleep because I'm laying down next to her. I try to sneak out. There's evenings when it's a struggle for me to sneak out because I'll be halfway to the door and she'll go, Mom, and I've got to come back to bed. Once again, this is how not to sleep train your child. Anyways, all of this leads to tip number 4. Consistency really is overrated. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I am not a nighttime person. I am better in the morning. My husband, on the other hand, is a nighttime person. Problem is, he about half the time works at night. So it's up to me to put my daughter to bed. Consistency is not my strong suit. I have ADHD, which I just found out a few years ago, and it explains so much about me. But as a mom, ADHD means consistency isn't great. So what happens is I get tired at about 7, 8 o'clock, and I am ready for bed. You guys might have the child who is going to run and run and run and run and run and then just collapse and sleep. My daughter does great with the run around. She's never collapsed and slept. The only way to get my daughter to sleep is pitch black and a fan or some sort of sound machine in the background. And of course, my arm is a pillow. But at 6.5, we still haven't come up with a great routine. My daughter has allergies, so she takes medication. We will bring her into her room. She got to brush her teeth, go into her room, read a book, and do some lullabies. And then she should be ready to sleep, right? But, it depends on the night. Sometimes we're watching a TV show, goes a little bit later. I fully admit I shouldn't be having her watch TV shows at night, but you know what? I have no energy at night, and I have come to realize actually that it's better to get her to wear down if you're watching something really boring, like an adult show. At least that worked when she was 3. Gilmore Girls would put that kid to sleep, no problem. But so finally, we hit the 8 o'clock time zone. We try to go back and forth. And I tend to move into my bedroom, which I try not to, but man, by the end of the night, I'm ready. So I move into my bedroom and into our bed watching TV. And then we go into her room to go to sleep, which means I have to sleep next to her. Which means that after we go through the whole process, we're reading the book. Mom, can I read another chapter? So we read another chapter. Okay, will you sing me a lullaby? So I sing her a lullaby. Another one. I sing her a second lullaby. Another one. I sing her a third lullaby. After a while, it feels like I'm putting on a concert. Either way, eventually she falls asleep. More often, I fall asleep first and then she falls asleep. Then I wake up at like midnight, 1 o'clock, try to sneak out. Mom, I wasn't asleep. Mind you, my daughter snores. So yeah, she was asleep. But so I get back in bed. There have been far too many evenings into the morning where I wake up at about 5 o'clock and I'm finally able to go back to my room. The final tip to not sleep train is do not show fear. Although this is kind of on the side of really don't give in to this, which I do all the time. Because she wants to be holding mommy. She has a nightmare. Anything that's going to keep her from sleeping, I'm going to give in, and she's still going to be sleeping in my bed. My daughter's 6.5, 4 foot tall, and takes over. We're in a king-size bed solely because more often than not, we need room for my daughter to sleep. Basically, what I've learned is sleep training is not a one-size-fits-all. We're all going to have our own things. Some people are great at putting their kid to sleep and being consistent. Some people, like me, are not. Sleep training is more like sleep begging. It's rough. It is really, really rough out here. And you're going to have some nights that are great, some of the nights that aren't. Don't get me wrong, my daughter is awful at sleeping on her own. It just is the reality in our house. But there's been some times where she can just put herself to bed, sleep train on her own, and be good. She went to my mother's house not too long ago, and my mom was dealing with my father because he's sick. And so she put herself in the room, fell asleep without anyone putting her to bed. You think she does that with me? Not a chance. Your child will fall asleep, whether it's in their bed, in your bed, or on the floor. Either way, I call that a win. Now, if you have a child and you're looking for a really good bedtime story, especially as the holidays come up in a few months, I wrote this book, Santa's Twin. You can see it back here, but I will put a video link as well. And it's going to give you a fun story about Santa's twin who travels around the world to get supplies for the elves so the children can have toys on Christmas morning. I hope you enjoy, and I will see you on Thursday. Bye.